The cafeteria fell silent as 17-year-old Marcus Chun stared down at the half-eaten sandwich floating in murky dishwater, pieces of lettuce and tomato creating a disgusting soup in the gray plastic tub. The three seniors surrounding him wore matching grins, their eyes gleaming with the kind of cruel satisfaction that only comes from watching someone's dignity crumble. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Go on, Chun, sneered Tyler Brennan, the tallest of the trio, his voice dripping with mock encouragement. You said you were hungry, right? Well, there's your lunch. What Tyler and his cronies didn't know was that the quiet kid they'd been tormenting for months had spent the last 8 years of his life mastering something that would soon turn their world upside down. But that revelation was still 20 minutes away. For now, Marcus just stood there, his dark hair falling across his face, hiding the storm brewing behind his calm exterior. The story of how 3 bullies learned the hardest lesson of their lives begins on a Tuesday morning in September. At Jefferson High School in suburban Denver, Colorado. Marcus Chun had perfected the art of invisibility by his junior year at Jefferson High. At 5'7", with a slight build, he moved through the crowded hallways like a ghost, never making eye contact, never raising his voice, never drawing attention to himself. His black hair was always neatly combed, his clothes pressed and clean, and his backpack worn with both straps, a dead giveaway that he wasn't part of any particular social circle. The morning of September 15th started like any other. Marcus arrived at school precisely at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the first bell, and headed straight to his locker. The combination 182436 spun easily under his fingers, a muscle memory developed over 2 years of the same routine. He carefully arranged his textbooks in order of his class schedule, a habit his mother had instilled in him since middle school. Organization is the foundation of success, Marcus, she would say in her soft voice, the same tone she used when teaching him the ancient philosophies that had been passed down through her family for generations. Dr. Linda Chun was a philosophy professor at the University of Colorado, and her influence on Marcus ran deeper than most people realized. As Marcus retrieved his chemistry textbook, he noticed the folded piece of paper that had been shoved through the ventilation slots of his locker. His heart sank. He'd been receiving these notes for 3 weeks now, ever since the incident in Mr. Rodriguez's history class where he'd accidentally corrected the teacher's date about the Battle of Gettysburg. The correction itself wasn't the problem. It was the fact that Tyler Brennan had been giving a presentation at the time and had gotten the date wrong. Tyler Brennan was everything Marcus wasn't. 6'2", broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy confidence that came from being the star quarterback of the varsity football team. His blonde hair was always perfectly styled, his leather jacket worn with casual pride, and his smile could light up a room when it wasn't being used as a weapon. Tyler came from old Denver money, the kind of family that had streets named after them and donated wings to hospitals. His father, Richard Brennan, owned the largest construction company in the state, and Tyler had never wanted for anything in his life. The note contained the same type of message as the others. Keep your mouth shut, freak. Nobody likes a know-it-all. This one was signed with a crude drawing of a football and the initials TB. Marcus crumpled the paper and shoved it into his pocket, a routine he'd developed to avoid leaving evidence. He'd learned early that reporting these incidents only made things worse. The school administration had a way of handling bullying that involved mandatory counseling sessions and conflict resolution meetings that somehow always ended with Marcus being told to try to fit in better, while Tyler received a slap on the wrist and a reminder about leadership responsibilities. The first period bell rang and Marcus made his way to advanced placement chemistry. The classroom was on the 3rd floor of the science building, and he always took the stairs 2 at a time, not because he was in a hurry, but because the physical exertion helped calm his mind. Dr. Patricia Williams, the chemistry teacher, had arranged the lab tables in pairs, and Marcus had been fortunate enough to be partnered with Sarah Kim, one of the few students who treated him with basic human decency. Sarah was a quiet girl herself, but her silence came from focus rather than fear. She had immigrated from South Korea with her family when she was 12, and her dedication to her studies was legendary among the faculty. Her long black hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the same style of wire-rimmed glasses that made her look older than her 17 years. "Morning, Marcus," she said as he took his seat at their lab table. "Did you finish the calculations for today's experiment?" "Yes," Marcus replied, pulling out his notebook. His handwriting was precise and neat, each equation carefully balanced and checked twice. "I also ran through the potential error sources we discussed yesterday." Sarah nodded approvingly. She was one of the few people who appreciated Marcus's attention to detail rather than finding it annoying. They worked well together, their partnership built on mutual respect and shared academic goals. The chemistry experiment involved testing the pH levels of various household substances, a straightforward procedure that Marcus could have completed in his sleep. As he carefully measured out solutions and recorded data, he found himself thinking about the note in his pocket. Tyler's harassment had been escalating recently, moving from simple name-calling to more targeted intimidation. Last week, Tyler had accidentally bumped into Marcus in the hallway, sending his books flying and his papers scattering across the floor. The week before that, Tyler had started a rumor that Marcus had been caught cheating on a test, a lie. That had taken 3 days and a meeting with the principal to straighten out. "Marcus, you're gripping that beaker pretty tightly," Sarah observed, her voice cutting through his thoughts. He looked down and realized his knuckles were white around the glass container. "Sorry," he muttered, loosening his grip. "Just concentrating." Sarah gave him a concerned look but didn't press the issue. She'd noticed the changes in Marcus over the past few weeks, the way he'd become even more withdrawn, the dark circles under his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping well, the way he flinched slightly whenever someone approached him from behind. The truth was, Marcus hadn't been sleeping well. Not because he was afraid of Tyler Brennan, but because he was afraid of himself. Every night, he lay in bed thinking about the lessons his grandfather had taught him during those long summers in San Francisco's Chinatown. Master Liu Chun had been a small man, barely 5'5", but he moved with the fluid grace of water and struck with the force of lightning. He'd taught Marcus that true strength came not from the ability to fight, but from the wisdom to know when fighting was necessary. Power without control is destruction, his grandfather would say during their training sessions in the small dojo above his herbal medicine shop. Control without compassion is tyranny. You must find the balance, little dragon. Marcus had started training when he was 9 years old, after a group of older kids had cornered him in Golden Gate Park and taken his bike. His mother had been furious not at the bullies, but at the fact that Marcus had simply stood there and let it happen. She'd driven him straight to his grandfather's shop and announced that it was time for him to learn the family tradition. The Chun family had been practicing martial arts for over 200 years, a tradition that had survived wars, immigration, and the challenges of adapting to American culture. Marcus's great-great-grandfather had been a master of the Shaolin style, and each generation had added their own innovations to the family system. By the time Marcus began training, the Chun family martial arts had evolved into something unique, a blend of traditional kung fu, modern practical applications, and philosophical principles that emphasized mental discipline above physical technique. For 8 years, Marcus had trained religiously, 3 times a week during the school year, every day during summer breaks. He'd learned to move like smoke, to strike like thunder, and to read an opponent's intentions in the subtle shifts of their body language. His grandfather had been a demanding teacher, pushing Marcus to excel not just in physical technique, but in mental preparation and emotional control. A true warrior fights only when all other options have been exhausted, Master Liu had told him during their final training session before his death 2 years ago. But when that moment comes, you must be ready to act with complete commitment. Half measures in combat lead to defeat and dishonor. Marcus had never told anyone at school about his training. His mother had advised him to keep it private, partly for safety reasons and partly because she believed that Marcus's greatest strength would always be his mind, not his fists. She'd seen too many young men become overconfident in their physical abilities and lose sight of their academic goals. That the chemistry class ended without incident, and Marcus gathered his materials with the same methodical care he applied to everything else. His next class was American Literature with Mrs. Henderson, followed by Advanced Calculus, then lunch. It was during lunch that things usually got complicated. The Jefferson High Cafeteria was a social battlefield disguised as a dining hall. The popular kids claimed the tables near the windows. The athletes dominated the center section, and the various cliques and social groups arranged themselves in an unspoken hierarchy that everyone understood, but no one officially acknowledged. Marcus typically ate alone at a small table in the back corner, close enough to the emergency exit that he could leave quickly if necessary. He'd brought his lunch from home, a turkey sandwich on whole wheat bread, an apple, and a bottle of water. His mother always packed his lunches, including a small note written in her careful handwriting. Today's note read, "Remember, Marcus, the bamboo that bends survives the storm that destroys the mighty oak. Have a wonderful day. Love, Mom." Marcus smiled slightly as he read the note, then folded it carefully and tucked it into his wallet with the others. His mother had been leaving him notes since elementary school, each one containing a small piece of wisdom or encouragement. He'd kept every single one. He was halfway through his sandwich when Tyler Brennan and his 2 closest friends, Jake Morrison and Danny Phillips, approached his table. Marcus noticed them coming before they reached him. Peripheral vision was one of the first things his grandfather had taught him to develop. The 3 seniors moved with the casual arrogance of people who'd never been challenged, their letterman jackets marking them as members of the football team's inner circle. Jake Morrison was Tyler's lieutenant, a stocky redhead with freckles and a perpetual smirk. He played defensive tackle and had the build for it, thick shoulders, powerful arms, and the kind of physical presence that made people step aside in hallways. His family owned a chain of auto dealerships across Colorado, and Jake had inherited his father's aggressive approach to business and life. Danny Phillips was different from the other 2, smaller and more wiry, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He played wide receiver and was known for his quick thinking and faster mouth. His father was a prominent attorney in Denver, and Danny had inherited a talent for finding people's weaknesses and exploiting them with surgical precision. Well, Tyler said as he approached Marcus's table, his voice carrying the mock friendliness that always preceded trouble. "If it isn't our favorite little genius. How's the studying going, Chun?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus continued eating his sandwich, not looking up. He'd learned that acknowledging Tyler's presence usually made things worse, while ignoring him sometimes led to the group losing interest and moving on. "I'm talking to you, freak," Tyler continued, his voice hardening. "It's rude to ignore people when they're being friendly." Jake and Danny had positioned themselves on either side of Marcus's table, blocking his access to the emergency exit. It was a practiced maneuver, one they'd clearly used before. Marcus finally looked up, meeting Tyler's eyes with a calm expression that betrayed nothing of what he was feeling. "Hello, Tyler," Marcus said quietly. "How are you doing today?" "Oh, I'm doing great," Tyler replied, his smile growing wider. "Just thought I'd come over and check on my favorite little know-it-all." I heard you corrected Mrs. Patterson in English class yesterday. Something about symbolism in The Great Gatsby? Marcus had indeed corrected Mrs. Patterson, but only after she'd asked the class a direct question about the green light symbolism, and no one else had volunteered an answer. He'd raised his hand and provided the correct interpretation, which had earned him a nod of approval from the teacher and apparently caught Tyler's attention. She asked a question, Marcus said simply. I answered it. Right, Tyler nodded. Mockingly, you answered it, just like you always do. Always ready with the right answer, aren't you, Chun? Always making the rest of us look stupid. That's not my intention, Marcus replied, and he meant it. He'd never tried to make anyone look stupid. He just couldn't help himself when he knew the answer to something. Danny Phillips leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Marcus could hear. See, that's the problem, genius. You don't even realize you're doing it. You walk around here like you're better than everyone else, with your perfect grades and your teacher's pet attitude. It's annoying. Marcus felt his jaw tighten slightly, but he kept his expression neutral. His grandfather had taught him that the first rule of conflict was to avoid escalation whenever possible. I'm not trying to be better than anyone. I'm just trying to do well in school. Just trying to do well, Jake mimicked in a high-pitched voice. Listen to this guy. I'm just trying to do well in school. What are you, 40 years old? The three seniors laughed, drawing attention from nearby tables. Marcus noticed that other students were beginning to watch the interaction, some with curiosity, others with the kind of uncomfortable fascination that people felt when witnessing the car accident. Tyler reached over and picked up Marcus's apple, tossing it casually from hand to hand. You know what your problem is, Chun? You don't know how to have fun. You're always so serious, always so focused on your books and your grades. When's the last time you did something spontaneous? Something a little crazy? Marcus's eyes followed the apple as Tyler continued to toss it. I have fun, he said, though even as he said it, he realized how unconvincing it sounded. Oh, really? Tyler's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. What kind of fun? Reading? Studying? Doing extra credit work? I read for pleasure, Marcus said. Defensively, I enjoy learning new things. Learning new things, Danny repeated, shaking his head. This guy's unbelievable. You know what, Chun? I think you need to learn something new right now. Something about how the real world works. Tyler suddenly stopped tossing the apple and took a large bite out of it, chewing deliberately while maintaining eye contact with Marcus. That's good. Thanks for the snack, buddy. Marcus felt a flash of anger, but suppressed it immediately. It was just an apple. He could buy another one. This wasn't worth fighting over. You're welcome, he said quietly. Tyler's smile faltered slightly at Marcus's lack of reaction. He'd been expecting anger, maybe an attempt to grab the apple back. Instead, Marcus had simply accepted the theft with the same calm demeanor he brought to everything else. You know what I think? Tyler continued, his voice growing more aggressive. I think you're scared. I think underneath all that quiet, polite bullshit, you're just a coward who's afraid to stand up for himself. Now Marcus looked up, meeting Tyler's eyes directly. For just a moment, Tyler caught a glimpse of something different in the smaller boy's expression, something that made him unconsciously take a half-step backward. I'm not a coward, Marcus said, his voice still quiet but carrying a weight. That hadn't been there before. No? Tyler recovered quickly, puffing out his chest. Then prove it. Stand up. Show us what you're made of. Marcus remained seated, his hands folded calmly in his lap. I don't need to prove anything to you. See? Tyler turned to his friends triumphantly. I told you. Total coward. Probably goes home and cries to his mommy every night. The mention of his mother caused Marcus's hands to clench slightly, but he still didn't rise to the bait. His grandfather had taught him that the strongest response to insults was often no response at all. Jake Morrison apparently growing impatient with the slow pace of the confrontation, reached over and knocked Marcus's water bottle off the table. The plastic container hit the floor with a hollow sound, and water began spreading across the linoleum. "Oops," Jake said with a grin. "Clumsy me." Marcus looked down at the spilled water, then back up at Jake. "Accidents happen," he said calmly. "Accidents?" Danny laughed. "That was no accident, genius. That was Jake showing you what happens when you disrespect your betters." "My betters?" Marcus repeated, and for the first time, there was a hint of steel in his voice. Tyler heard it too, and it made him want to push harder. "That's right, Chun, your betters. Face it, you're nothing here. You're a nobody. A ghost. The only reason anyone even knows your name is because you keep raising your hand in class, like some kind of trained seal." Marcus stood up slowly, his movements fluid and controlled. At his full height, he was still several inches shorter than Tyler, but something about his posture made the difference seem less significant. "Is that what you think?" Marcus asked quietly. "It's what I know," Tyler replied, but his voice lacked some of its earlier confidence. There was something about the way Marcus was standing, the way he held himself, that suggested hidden depths Tyler hadn't expected. "Then you don't know me very well," Marcus said, and began gathering his things. His sandwich was only half eaten, but he'd suddenly lost his appetite. "Oh, I know you well enough," Tyler said, emboldened by what he interpreted as Marcus's retreat. "I know you're weak. I know you're scared. And I know you're not going to do anything about it." Marcus paused in his packing, his hand hovering over his unopened bag of chips. "What do you want from me, Tyler?" The question caught Tyler off guard. He'd been focused on the game of intimidation, on the thrill of having power over someone else. He hadn't really considered what his ultimate goal was. "I want you to learn your place," Tyler said finally. "I want you to understand that you can't just waltz around here thinking you're special." "I don't think I'm special," Marcus replied, shouldering his backpack. "I think I'm just trying to get through high school like everyone else." "No, you're not," Danny interjected. "You're trying to make the rest of us look bad. Every time you answer a question, every time you get a perfect score on a test, you're showing off. You're rubbing it in our faces." Marcus looked at Danny with genuine confusion. "I'm not trying to make anyone look bad. I'm just doing my best." "Well, maybe your best is too good," Jake said, stepping closer. "Maybe you need to dial it back a little. Maybe you need to learn to blend in." "Blend in?" Marcus repeated. "You want me to do poorly in school so you'll feel better about yourselves?" "We want you to stop being such a freak," Tyler said bluntly. "We want you to act normal for once in your life." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering Tyler's words. Around them, the cafeteria had grown noticeably quieter as more students became aware of the confrontation. He could feel dozens of eyes watching him, waiting to see how he would respond. "I am normal," Marcus said finally. "This is who I am. I'm not going to change myself to make you more comfortable." Tyler's face flushed red. "Is that right? You're not going to change? Well, maybe we need to help you change. Maybe we need to teach you some manners. And how do you plan to do that?" Marcus asked, his voice still perfectly calm. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Tyler looked around the cafeteria, aware that they had an audience, aware that his reputation was on the line. He'd pushed this confrontation to a point where backing down would mean losing face, but he also sensed that Marcus wasn't quite the easy target he'd appeared to be. "We'll figure something out," Tyler said finally. "Won't we, guys?" Jake and Danny nodded, but Marcus noticed that neither of them seemed particularly enthusiastic about the prospect. They were followers, not leaders, and without Tyler's driving aggression, they probably wouldn't have bothered with him at all. "I'm sure you will," Marcus said quietly. "But for now, I need to get to class." He turned to leave, but Tyler's hand shot out and grabbed his shoulder, spinning him around. The physical contact crossed a line that words hadn't, and Marcus felt his body respond instinctively. His muscles tensed, his balance shifted, and for just a moment, his carefully maintained composure cracked. Tyler felt the change immediately. The shoulder under his hand felt different suddenly, not soft and yielding, but coiled and ready. He looked into Marcus's eyes and saw something that made his blood run cold. It was the look of a predator that had been mistaken for prey. "Let go of me," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tyler's hand dropped away as if it had been burned. He took a step back, his face pale, trying to process what he'd just experienced. For a moment, he'd felt genuinely afraid of them. Quiet kid he'd been tormenting for weeks. Marcus straightened his backpack straps and walked away without another word, leaving Tyler and his friends standing by the table, confused and shaken. The brief encounter had revealed something that none of them had expected, that Marcus Chun was not the helpless victim they'd taken him for. But it was too late to stop what they'd started. Tyler's pride had been wounded, and he wasn't the type to let a slight go unpunished. As he watched Marcus disappear through the cafeteria doors, he was already planning his next move. The game was far from over. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Jefferson High's courtyard as Marcus made his way to his final class of the day. Advanced calculus with Mr. Thompson was usually a refuge, a place where mathematical precision created order out of chaos, where problems had definitive solutions and logic prevailed over emotion. But today, Marcus found himself unable to concentrate on derivatives and integrals. The encounter with Tyler in the cafeteria had shifted something fundamental. For 3 weeks, Marcus had managed to maintain his composure, to treat Tyler's harassment as nothing more than an inconvenience. But when Tyler had grabbed his shoulder, when he'd felt that aggressive hand spin him around like he was a child's toy, something deeper had awakened. The careful control his grandfather had taught him suddenly felt less like wisdom and more like a cage. Mr. Thompson was writing equations on the whiteboard, his methodical approach to calculus normally soothing to Marcus's analytical mind. Today, however, the numbers seemed to blur together as Marcus replayed the cafeteria scene in his head. He'd seen the moment of recognition in Tyler's eyes, the instant when the bully realized he'd miscalculated his target. It should have been satisfying, but instead, it filled Marcus with a cold dread. "Mr. Chun," Mr. Thompson's voice cut through his thoughts. "Perhaps you'd like to solve this integration problem for us." Marcus looked up at the board, his mind automatically processing the complex equation. The solution unfolded in his consciousness like a flower blooming, each step clear and inevitable. He stood and walked to the board, his hand moving smoothly as he worked through the problem with practiced efficiency. "Excellent work, as always," Mr. Thompson said with approval. "Your understanding of advanced integration techniques is remarkable for someone your age." Marcus nodded politely and returned to his seat, but he noticed the hostile glances from several other students. His academic performance, once a source of quiet pride, now felt like a target painted on his back. Every correct answer, every moment of recognition from teachers, seemed to widen the gap between him and his peers. After class, Marcus walked to his locker with deliberate slowness. The hallways were crowded with students heading to after-school activities, football practice, drama club, debate team. He envied them their easy camaraderie, their ability to find belonging in groups. For Marcus, school had always been a solitary experience, but lately, that solitude felt more like isolation. His locker combinations spun easily under his fingers, but as the door swung open, a cascade of crumpled papers fell to the floor. Marcus knelt to gather them, his heart sinking as he recognized the handwriting. More notes from Tyler and his friends, but these were different from the earlier ones. These were detailed, specific, filled with threats that went beyond simple name-calling. "You think you're so smart, but you're just a pathetic little freak who doesn't know his place. Your mommy can't protect you forever, Chun. Time to learn how the real world works. We're going to teach you some manners, and it's going to hurt." Marcus crumpled the notes and shoved them into his backpack, his jaw tightening. The threats themselves didn't frighten him. He'd faced worse during his training with his grandfather. What bothered him was the escalation, the way Tyler's harassment was becoming more personal, more vindictive. As he gathered his books, Marcus noticed a photograph that had been slipped into his locker. It was a picture of him from earlier that day, taken during lunch, showing him sitting alone at his table in the cafeteria. Someone had drawn a red circle around his face and written "loser" in bold letters across the bottom. The fact that Tyler had been watching him, photographing him, planning something elaborate, it suggested a level of obsession that went beyond normal bullying. "Hey, Marcus." He turned to find Sarah Kim standing behind him, her expression concerned. She was one of the few students who ever sought him out voluntarily, and her presence was a welcome relief from the hostility he'd been feeling all day. "Sarah," he said, managing a small smile. "How was your afternoon?" "Fine," she replied, but her eyes were studying his face intently. "I heard about what happened in the cafeteria. Are you okay?" Marcus closed his locker and shouldered his backpack. "I'm fine. It was nothing serious." "It didn't look like anything," Sarah said quietly. "Tyler Brennan has been targeting you for weeks. This is getting worse, not better." They walked together toward the main entrance, their footsteps echoing in the gradually emptying hallway. Marcus appreciated Sarah's concern, but he also knew there was nothing she could do to help. This was his problem to solve. "I can handle Tyler," Marcus said finally. "Can you?" Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him. "Marcus, I know you're smart, probably the smartest person in our class. But Tyler isn't interested in having an intellectual debate. He's interested in hurting you." Marcus met her gaze, seeing genuine worry in her dark eyes. "Why do you care?" he asked, not unkindly. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "Because you're a good person," she said finally. "Because you've never been anything but kind to me, even when other people ignored me or made fun of my accent. Because I know what it's like to be different, to not fit in." Her words hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. He'd spent so long focused on maintaining his emotional distance that he'd forgotten how good it felt to have someone care about his well-being. "Thank you," he said softly. "That means a lot to me." "Maybe you should talk to someone," Sarah suggested. "A counselor, or the principal, or your parents. This doesn't have to be something you face alone." Marcus shook his head. "I've tried that route before. It doesn't work. It just makes things worse. Then what are you going to do?" Marcus looked out through the glass doors at the parking lot, where groups of students were clustered around cars and buses. Somewhere out there, Tyler was probably planning his next move, plotting some new humiliation. The thought filled Marcus with a mixture of anger and anticipation that surprised him. "I'm going to wait," he said finally. "And when the time comes, I'm going to do what I have to do." Sarah studied his profile, noting the subtle change in his posture, the way his normally gentle expression had hardened. "That doesn't sound like you, Marcus." "Maybe you don't know me as well as you think," he replied, then immediately regretted the harshness in his voice. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean that." "Yes, you did," Sarah said sadly. "And that's what worries." They parted ways at the entrance, Sarah heading toward the bus stop while Marcus walked to where his mother would be waiting in the faculty parking lot. Dr. Linda Chun taught evening classes at the university, which meant she was usually available to pick him up after school. The routine was comforting, one of the few constants in his increasingly chaotic world. His mother was grading papers in the driver's seat when he approached the car, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she made notes in red ink. She looked up as he opened the passenger door, and he saw her expression immediately shift to concern. Rough day? She asked, setting her papers aside. Marcus buckled his seatbelt and leaned back in the seat. You could say that. Linda Chun had been a mother long enough to recognize when her son was holding something back. She started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, giving Marcus time to organize his thoughts. Do you want to talk about it? She asked finally. Marcus stared out the window at the suburban streets of Denver, watching the familiar landscape roll by. Remember when I was 9 and those kids took my bike in Golden Gate Park? Of course, Linda replied. That's when we decided you should start training with your grandfather. What did you tell me then about fighting back? Linda was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I told you that running away isn't always the answer. That sometimes when all other options are exhausted, you have to stand up for yourself. And what did Grandpa tell me? He told you that true strength comes from knowing when to fight and when to walk away. That the greatest victory is the one that doesn't require a battle. Marcus nodded, still looking out the window. I think I'm running out of options to walk away. Linda pulled into their driveway and turned off the engine. Their house was a modest 2-story colonial in a quiet neighborhood, with a small garden that Linda tended with the same methodical care she brought to her academic work. It was a place of peace and order, a sanctuary from the chaos of the outside world. Tell me what's happening, she said softly. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt, but didn't get out of the car. Instead, he reached into his backpack and pulled out the crumpled notes, handing them to his mother. Linda read them in silence, her expression growing darker with each message. How long has this been going on? She asked. 3 weeks. Maybe. A month. It started small. Name-calling, little incidents in the hallway. But it's getting worse. Linda looked at the photograph with the red circle around Marcus's face. This is stalking, Marcus. This is harassment. We need to report this to the school. I've tried that, Marcus said tiredly. They have meetings. They give everyone detention, and then it gets worse. Tyler's father donates money to the school. His family has influence. I'm just the quiet kid who doesn't cause trouble. Until now, Linda said, studying her son's face. Something's changed. I can see it in your eyes. Marcus finally looked at her, and she saw something that made her heart race. It was the same look his grandfather had sometimes worn during training sessions, the calm intensity of a person who had made a decision and was committed to seeing it through. I can't keep running, Mom. I can't keep pretending that being invisible is the same as being safe. Linda reached over and took his hand. Your grandfather spent 8 years teaching you discipline and control. He taught you that martial arts isn't about violence, it's about protection. Protection of yourself and others. I know, Marcus sighed quietly. But he also taught me that there comes a time when you have to act. When backing down only encourages more aggression. And you think that time is coming? Marcus squeezed his mother's hand. I think it's already here. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both lost in thought. Linda remembered her own father's teachings, the way he'd balanced ancient wisdom with practical reality. Master Liu Chun had been a gentle man, but he'd also been a warrior. He'd understood that sometimes the most peaceful option was to end a conflict decisively. If it comes to that, Linda said finally, you know what you have to do. I know, Marcus replied. I just hope I'm strong enough to do it right. You're stronger than you know, his mother said. And you're smarter than anyone gives you credit for. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and trust yourself. That evening, Marcus went through his usual routine with mechanical precision. Homework, dinner, reading before bed. But his mind kept drifting to the small dojo his grandfather had built in their garage, the place where he'd spent countless hours learning to move like water and strike like lightning. After his parents had gone to bed, Marcus made his way to the garage. The dojo was exactly as his grandfather had left it. Wooden floors worn smooth by decades of practice, mirrors along one wall, traditional weapons mounted on racks. The space smelled of incense and old wood, familiar scents that immediately calmed his racing thoughts. Marcus changed into his training clothes and began his evening routine. Forms first, the flowing movements that build strength and flexibility while teaching the body to move as a single unit. His grandfather had insisted on perfect form, drilling him until each technique became as natural as breathing. As he moved through the familiar patterns, Marcus felt his scattered thoughts begin to coalesce. The anger and frustration of the day transformed into something more focused, more purposeful. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a martial artist who had forgotten his own capabilities. The wooden training dummy in the corner had been his grandfather's favorite teaching tool. Hand-carved from a single piece of oak, it was designed to absorb and redirect force, teaching students to strike with precision rather than just power. Marcus approached it now with renewed respect, remembering the thousands of hours he'd spent learning to read its wooden feedback. His first strike was tentative, almost gentle. The dummy absorbed the impact without complaint, its ancient wood solid and unyielding. Marcus struck again, harder this time, feeling the familiar shock of contact travel up his arm. Gradually, he increased the intensity, his strikes becoming more focused, more devastating. The sound of wood against wood echoed through the garage as Marcus worked through his combinations. Punches, kicks, elbow strikes, knee attacks, all flowing together in a deadly dance that his grandfather had spent 8 years perfecting. With each strike, Marcus felt more connected to his training, more aware of the power he'd been carefully suppressing. By the time he finished, sweat was pouring down his face and his breathing was labored. But his mind was clear for the first time in weeks. He understood now what his grandfather had been trying to teach him, that true strength wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was about being ready when conflict became unavoidable. As he changed back into his regular clothes, Marcus thought about Tyler and his friends. They'd pushed him to this point through their own choices, their own escalating aggression. He'd tried to walk away, tried to be invisible, tried to avoid confrontation. But they'd mistaken his restraint for weakness, his peace for cowardice. Tomorrow, Marcus decided it would be different. He wouldn't go looking for trouble, but he wouldn't run from it either. If Tyler wanted to test him, if he wanted to push the quiet kid to his breaking point, then he was about to discover that he'd been playing a game with someone who had spent 8 years learning the rules of a different sport entirely. The garage was quiet as Marcus turned off the lights and headed back to the house. In 12 hours, he would walk into Jefferson High with the same calm demeanor he'd always maintained. But underneath that surface tranquility, something fundamental had shifted. The shy kid who'd been trying so hard to remain invisible was about to discover that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step into the light. Tyler Brennan and his friends had no idea what they'd awakened, but they were about to find out. The next morning arrived with an unusual fog that clung to Denver's streets like a gray blanket. Marcus walked through the school's main entrance at exactly 7:45 a.m., his movements carrying a subtle confidence that hadn't been there the day before. To the casual observer, he looked the same: neat clothes, organized backpack, quiet demeanor. But something in his posture had changed, a centered quality that spoke of inner resolve. Tyler Brennan was waiting by the trophy case near the main office, flanked by Jake and Danny. They'd clearly planned this confrontation, choosing a location with maximum visibility where other students would witness whatever humiliation they had planned. Tyler's smile was predatory as he spotted Marcus entering the building. "Well, well," Tyler called out, his voice carrying across the lobby. "Look who decided to show up today. We were starting to think you might be too scared to come to school." Marcus approached his locker without acknowledging the comment, his hands steady as he worked the combination. Other students had begun to gather, sensing the electric tension that preceded a major confrontation. Cell phones appeared as if by magic, ready to capture whatever was about to unfold. I'm talking to you, freak, Tyler continued, stepping away from the trophy case. Yesterday was just a warm-up. Today, we're going to finish what we started. What exactly did you start with? Marcus asked quietly, still facing his locker. His voice carried clearly in the suddenly quiet hallway, and Tyler felt a flicker of uncertainty at the calm confidence in those words. We started teaching you some respect, Jake interjected, puffing out his chest, and we're going to keep teaching until you learn. Marcus finally turned around, closing his locker with a soft click. When he faced the three seniors, something about his stance made several nearby students unconsciously step backward. He stood balanced on the balls of his feet, his weight evenly distributed, his hands relaxed at his sides. To someone who understood martial arts, his posture screamed danger. "And how do you plan to teach me?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying no emotion whatsoever. Tyler felt that same chill he'd experienced yesterday when he'd grabbed Marcus's shoulder, but his pride wouldn't let him back down now. Not with half the school watching. Not with his reputation on the line. "Follow us," Tyler commanded, jerking his head toward the side exit that led to the loading dock behind the building. "We're going to have a little conversation. Just the four of us." Marcus considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Lead the way." The small crowd of students followed at a distance as Tyler led Marcus and his friends through the corridors toward the back of the school. Word spread quickly through the building the quiet kid was finally going to get what was coming to him. Nobody expected what actually happened next. The loading dock was a concrete platform surrounded by dumpsters and maintenance equipment, hidden from the main campus by a brick wall. It was the perfect place for the kind of conversation Tyler had in mind, private enough to avoid teacher intervention, but accessible enough for word to spread about whatever happened. Tyler positioned himself directly in front of Marcus, while Jake and Danny flanked him on either side. The three seniors formed a semicircle, cutting off any obvious escape routes. It was a formation they'd used before, designed to intimidate and overwhelm. "Here's how this is going to work," Tyler began, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering an ultimatum. "You're going to get on your knees, you're going to apologize for being such an arrogant little know-it-all, and then you're going to eat whatever we put in front of you. Starting with this." He gestured toward one of the dumpsters, where the remains of yesterday's cafeteria garbage created a nauseating soup of spoiled food and dirty water. The smell alone was enough to make several watching students gag. "You want me to eat garbage," Marcus said, as if confirming the details of a business transaction. "That's right," Tyler grinned. "Just like the garbage you are. Maybe once you understand your place in the food chain, you'll stop acting like you're better than everyone else." Marcus looked at the dumpster, then back at Tyler. "And if I refuse?" "Then we'll make you," Danny said, cracking his knuckles dramatically. "The easy way or the hard way, your choice." "I see," Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "And you believe this will accomplish what, exactly?" Tyler's grin faltered slightly. This wasn't going according to script. Marcus was supposed to be terrified, pleading, maybe crying. Instead, he seemed to be conducting some kind of philosophical inquiry. "It'll teach you not to mess with your betters," Tyler snapped, his patience wearing thin. "My betters," Marcus repeated, and for the first time, there was a note of something dangerous in his voice. "You consider yourselves my betters." "Damn right we do," Jake said, stepping closer. "We're seniors, we're athletes, we matter in this school. You're just some nobody who thinks he's hot stuff because he gets good grades." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes moving from one face to another. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but every word carried with crystal clarity. "You're right about one thing," he said. "I have been thinking I was better than you. But not because of my grades. Because I thought I was above this kind of primitive behavior. I thought I was more civilized than you are. Is that right?" Tyler's face was flushing red with anger. "But I was wrong," Marcus continued, his posture shifting almost imperceptibly. "Civilization is a luxury that only works when everyone agrees to participate. When some people choose to act like animals, the civilized response is to speak their language." Tyler didn't fully understand what Marcus was saying, but he recognized a challenge when he heard one. Big words from a little man. Let's see if you can back them up. He swung at Marcus with a wild haymaker, the kind of punch that had worked perfectly well in previous fights against untrained opponents. Tyler was strong, aggressive, and used to winning through sheer intimidation and size advantage. The punch never landed. Marcus moved like liquid mercury, shifting his weight and angling his body so that Tyler's fist passed harmlessly through the space where his head had been a fraction of a second earlier. In the same motion, Marcus's left hand came up in a textbook palm strike that caught Tyler squarely in the solar plexus. The sound was like a baseball bat hitting a heavy bag. Tyler's eyes went wide with shock and pain as all the air exploded from his lungs. He doubled over, gasping like a fish out of water, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. Jake Morrison charged immediately, using his bulk and momentum to try to overwhelm Marcus through sheer force. It was the kind of aggressive rush that had served him well on the football field, where size and speed usually carried the day. Marcus sidestepped the charge with minimal effort, his movement so smooth it seemed almost casual. As Jake's momentum carried him past, Marcus delivered a precise knife-hand strike to a nerve cluster in Jake's neck. The redhead's legs immediately gave out, and he collapsed to the concrete, conscious but unable to coordinate his movements. Danny Phillips was smarter than his friends, and he'd seen enough to realize that Marcus wasn't the helpless victim they'd assumed. Instead of charging blindly forward, he pulled out his cell phone and began backing toward the exit. "I'm calling security," he announced, his voice shaking slightly. "This is assault. You're going to jail for this." Marcus turned his attention to Danny, his expression still perfectly calm. "Are you going to help them?" he asked, nodding toward Tyler and Jake, who were both still incapacitated. "I'm calling for help," Danny repeated, but his thumb wasn't moving toward the emergency contact. He was frozen, caught between his loyalty to his friends and his growing realization that he was completely outmatched. "Call whoever you want," Marcus said quietly. "But ask yourself this first. Who do you think started this confrontation? Who brought us out here? Who threatened whom?" Danny looked around at the crowd of students who had witnessed the entire encounter. Every cell phone in sight had been recording, capturing Tyler's threats, his demands that Marcus eat garbage, his aggressive first strike. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Tyler had finally managed to catch his breath, though he was still bent over and wheezing. He looked up at Marcus with a mixture of pain, shock, and dawning understanding. The quiet kid he'd been tormenting for weeks had just demonstrated skills that belonged in action movies, not high school hallways. "How?" Tyler gasped, his voice barely audible. 8 years of training," Marcus replied simply. 3 times a week during school, every day during summers. My grandfather was a very thorough teacher." Jake was trying to get back to his feet, but his legs weren't cooperating properly. The nerve strike had temporarily disrupted his motor control, leaving him conscious but helpless. He'd never experienced anything like it, and the fear in his eyes was palpable. Marcus looked around at the assembled students, many of whom were still recording the aftermath. "I want everyone to understand something," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the loading dock. "This didn't happen because I wanted to fight. This happened because I was threatened, cornered, and attacked. I defended myself using the minimum force necessary to end the threat." He turned his attention back to Tyler, who was slowly straightening up. "You've been escalating this situation for weeks. You've threatened me, harassed me, and today you brought me here with the intention of forcing me to eat garbage. All of that stops now. You can't just attack people. Tyler wheezed, though. His protest lacked conviction. "I didn't attack anyone," Marcus replied calmly. "You swung at me first. I simply responded appropriately. Every person here witnessed it, and half of them recorded it." Danny finally found his voice. "This isn't over," he said, though his tone suggested he hoped it was. Marcus looked at him with something approaching pity. "Yes, it is. Because if any of you ever threaten me again, if you ever so much as look at me the wrong way, I'll demonstrate some of the techniques my grandfather taught me that I didn't use today. And trust me, you don't want that demonstration." The quiet authority in his voice left no room for doubt. This wasn't a teenager making empty threats. This was someone who had just revealed the tip of an iceberg and was calmly explaining how deep the rest of it went. Tyler tried one last time to salvage his dignity. "You think you're tough now? You think this makes you some kind of hero?" "No," Marcus said, shouldering his backpack. "I think this makes me someone who stood up for himself when he had no other choice. I think this makes me someone who's tired of being your victim." He began walking toward the exit, then paused and looked back at the three seniors. "For what it's worth, I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to get through high school without any drama, but you made that impossible." As Marcus disappeared, around the corner, the crowd of students began to disperse, their phones already uploading videos to social media. The story would spread through Jefferson High like wildfire. The quiet kid who turned out to be a martial arts expert, the bullies who picked the wrong target, the confrontation that ended in 30 seconds with surgical precision. Tyler, Jake, and Danny were left alone on the loading dock, forced to confront the reality that their reign of intimidation was over. They'd awakened something they didn't understand, challenged someone they'd completely misjudged, and discovered that their assumptions about power and strength were dangerously flawed. The shy kid they'd tried to humiliate had just taught them the most important lesson of their high school careers, that true strength often comes in quiet packages, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who's been trying hardest to avoid a fight. Marcus Chun walked back into Jefferson High with his head held high, knowing that everything had changed. The invisible boy was invisible. No more, and that was exactly how it should be. The aftermath of the loading dock incident rippled through Jefferson High like an earthquake. By third period, the videos had gone viral within the school's social media ecosystem. Students who had never noticed Marcus before were now whispering his name in hallways, their voices carrying a mixture of awe and newfound respect. Principal Margaret Davidson received word of the incident during her morning coffee, and by the time she summoned Marcus to her office, she'd already reviewed the footage from 3 different angles. The evidence was overwhelming. Tyler Brennan had issued threats, demanded degrading behavior, and thrown the first punch. Marcus had responded with what could only be described as restrained self-defense. "Mr. Chun," Principal Davidson said as Marcus entered her office, "please have a seat." The principal's office was a study in bureaucratic neutrality, motivational posters, filing cabinets, and the kind of institutional furniture that suggested order without comfort. Marcus sat in the chair across from her desk, his posture relaxed, but alert. "I've reviewed the incident that occurred this morning," she continued, her tone carefully neutral. "Based on the video evidence and witness statements, it appears you were acting in self-defense." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied simply. "However, I'm concerned about the level of force you used. Your response was unusually effective for someone your age." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I used the minimum force necessary to protect myself. Neither Tyler nor Jake required medical attention." Principal Davidson leaned back in her chair, studying the young man across from her. She'd been an educator for 23 years, and she'd never encountered a situation quite like this. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "My grandfather taught me martial arts," Marcus said. "I've been training for 8 years. Why didn't you mention this when you reported the bullying incidents?" Because I was hoping to resolve the situation without violence. My training emphasizes avoiding conflict whenever possible. The principal nodded slowly. And now? Now Tyler and his friends understand that I'm not an easy target. I believe the harassment will stop. Principal Davidson had already spoken with Tyler's father, Richard Brennan, who was threatening legal action despite the clear evidence that his son had initiated the confrontation. She'd also received calls from 3 school board members, 2 local news stations, and a representative from the district's legal department. The incident was becoming a public relations nightmare. Mr. Chun, I want you to know that the school takes bullying very seriously. We should have done more to protect you earlier. Thank you, Marcus said. But I think the situation has resolved itself. As Marcus left the principal's office, he found Sarah Kim waiting in the hallway, her face a mixture of concern and amazement. Are you okay? She asked immediately. I heard what happened, but I couldn't believe it until I saw the videos. I'm fine, Marcus assured her. Better than fine, actually. Sarah studied his face, noting the subtle changes in his demeanor. The constant tension he'd carried for weeks was gone, replaced by a calm confidence that transformed his entire presence. You never told me you knew martial arts, she said. It never came up, Marcus replied with a slight smile. Besides, I was hoping I'd never need to use it. But you did need to use it. Yes, Marcus said quietly. And I'm glad I was prepared. They walked together toward the cafeteria, and Marcus noticed the change in how other students reacted to his presence. Instead of looking through him as if he were invisible, they were watching him with curious interest. Some nodded respectfully as he passed, while others whispered to their friends and pointed discreetly in his direction. The cafeteria presented a different challenge. Marcus had always eaten alone, but today his usual table was surrounded by students, wanting to hear his version of events. He navigated through the crowd politely but firmly, making it clear that he wasn't interested in becoming a celebrity. Marcus, called a voice from across the room. He turned to see Alex Rodriguez, the captain of the wrestling team, approaching with several teammates. Dude, I had no idea you could fight like that. Where did you train? San Francisco, Marcus replied, my grandfather's dojo. That was some serious kung fu stuff, Alex continued, his voice filled with genuine respect. I've been wrestling for 6 years, and I've never seen anything like those moves you pulled. Marcus appreciated the respect but felt uncomfortable with the attention. I just did what I had to do. Well, if you ever want to join the wrestling team, you'd be welcome, Alex offered. We could use someone with your skills. The offer was tempting, but Marcus shook his head. Thank you, but I prefer to train alone. As the lunch period progressed, Marcus noticed that Tyler and his friends were notably absent from their usual table near the windows. Word was that Tyler had gone home sick after the incident, while Jake was in the nurse's office complaining of persistent dizziness. Danny had apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor and was keeping a very low profile. Dr. Patricia Williams approached Marcus's table during lunch, her expression thoughtful. Mr. Chun, might I have a word? Marcus followed his chemistry teacher to a quiet corner of the cafeteria. Dr. Williams was known for her no-nonsense approach to both science and life, and Marcus respected her opinion more than most adults at the school. I heard about this morning's incident, she said quietly. Are you all right? I'm fine, Dr. Williams. Thank you for asking. What you did today, ... That level of skill doesn't come from casual training, Marcus nodded. My grandfather was very thorough in his teaching. I imagine he was. But I'm more interested in what he taught you about responsibility. You had considerable power at your disposal. You could have seriously injured those boys. That wasn't my goal, Marcus said firmly. I only wanted to stop the threat. Dr. Williams smiled. Slightly. That's what I hoped you'd say. Power without restraint is dangerous, especially at your age. Your grandfather taught you well. He always said that the strongest person in the room is the one who doesn't need to prove it. Wise words. But sometimes, as you learned today, proving it becomes necessary. Marcus returned to his afternoon classes with a sense of closure he hadn't felt in months. The constant background stress of watching Tyler and his friends was gone, replaced by a peaceful awareness that he could handle whatever challenges came his way. In advanced English literature, Mrs. Henderson seemed to sense the change in her usually quiet student. When she asked for volunteers to analyze a passage from To Kill a Mockingbird about courage and standing up for what's right, Marcus raised his hand for the first time all semester. Atticus Finch says that courage isn't a man with a gun in his hand, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the classroom. It's knowing you're licked before you begin, but beginning anyway and seeing it through. I think that applies to more than just legal battles. Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. Elaborate on that, Mr. Chun. Sometimes courage means accepting that conflict is inevitable, even when you'd prefer to avoid it. Sometimes the right thing to do is the thing you least want to do. The teacher's eyes held understanding as she recognized that Marcus was speaking from recent experience. And how do we know when that time has come? When walking away means abandoning your principles, Marcus replied. When staying silent enables others to cause harm. After school, Marcus found his mother waiting in the parking lot as usual, but her expression was different than normal. She'd clearly heard about the incident from the school administration. The principal called me, Linda Chun said as Marcus got into the car. She said you handled yourself with remarkable restraint. I did what Grandpa taught me, Marcus replied. I used only the force necessary to protect myself. Linda started the car but didn't immediately drive away. How do you feel about what happened? Marcus considered the question carefully. Relieved. For the first time in weeks, I don't feel like I'm looking over my shoulder. I don't feel like a victim anymore. Your grandfather would be proud, Linda said softly. Not because you fought, but because you fought for the right reasons and in the right way. I hope so, Marcus said. I never wanted it to come to that, but when it did, you were ready. That's what all those years of training were for, not to make you aggressive, but to give you options when aggression was forced upon you. That evening, Marcus returned to his grandfather's dojo in the garage, but this time his practice session felt different. The movements that had once been exercises in self-discipline now felt like expressions of self-confidence. The techniques that had been theoretical possibilities were now proven capabilities. As he worked through his forms, Marcus reflected on the events of the day. The confrontation with Tyler had lasted less than 30 seconds, but its effects would ripple through the rest of his high school experience. He was no longer the invisible boy who tried to avoid notice. He was Marcus Chun, the student who stood up for himself when pushed too far. The wooden training dummy absorbed his strikes with the same stoic patience it had shown for years, but Marcus approached it with new understanding. Each technique his grandfather had taught him was not just a method of combat, but a tool for protecting the values they held dear: respect, dignity, and the right to live without fear. As he finished his practice and prepared for bed, Marcus realized that the shy kid Tyler had tried to humiliate was gone forever. In his place stood someone who understood that true strength came not from the absence of fear, but from the willingness to act despite it. The bullies had made the mistake of assuming that quiet meant weak, that peaceful meant helpless. They would never make that mistake again. Tomorrow, Marcus would walk into Jefferson High as someone new, not because he'd won a fight, but because he'd finally learned to value himself enough to refuse being anyone's victim. The boy who had tried so hard to be invisible had discovered that sometimes the most important thing you can do is step into the light and show the world exactly who you are. The reign of Tyler Brennan and his cronies was over, ended not by administrative intervention or parental pressure, but by the simple realization that some people refuse to be pushed around. Marcus had given them a choice: treat him with respect or face the consequences of their actions. They had chosen poorly, and now they would have to live with the results of that choice. But Marcus Chun would sleep peacefully, knowing that he had finally found the balance his grandfather had spent 8 years teaching him to achieve. The balance between peace and strength, between patience and action, between who he had been and who he was meant to become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.